everyone, and welcome to another 5-9 Gaming review. My name is Talon, and today I'm joined by Adam, and we are going to be discussing and reviewing the new game Biomutant. Now, this game has had a bit of a rough road, to say the least, when it comes to its release. It has been delayed quite a few times. However, it is obviously being developed by a very small studio called Experiment 101 in Sweden, and it's actually published by THQ Nordic. So they've got some history with some pretty good games. In fact, one of my favorite games from them would probably be Darksiders 2, which was a very fun game for me personally. So a lot of people have had some good high expectations, especially because it's a single player game. Again, we'll get into more details about that in a second, but it's a single player game. It looks really good, especially for what a small team can do. However, once the pre-release reviews started coming out, there seemed to be a lot of ups and downs and people saying this and people saying this. So we here at 5-9 Gaming wanted to take our time and wanted to really give it a go and see what it was like. So Adam played the game over on the Xbox Series X. I played it over on PC. We're gonna see how it went. So without further ado, here's our review of Biomutant. Starting off our review, we want to talk about the game's design. Biomutant is an action RPG set in the post-apocalyptic world with little creatures who have learned to walk on two legs, make and shoot weapons, and even kung fu enemies, a la Devil May Cry. In fact, if I had to personally describe Biomutant, I would say it's a mix between Fable for its characters and world look, Devil May Cry for its close quarter combat, Borderlands for its crazy amount of loadouts you can have, Horizon for the world exploration, and even Little Big Planet. You know, for the narrator. I mean, come on, listen to that voice.
Look at you, all pooped out. From this point on, there's no way forward but going back in.
Yes, I know it's not the same voice, but it's immediately what I compared it to. Anyway, the game is impressive in its scale, to say the least. It has everything from missions, puzzles, a few at least, combat, and even some dialogue choices. Think Infamous, you know, the good and bad choices you had for some of the main missions and everything. Outposts are one of the main missions where you either try to unite everyone or conquer other tribes in the game. To me, these seem to be what the developers were going for a main focus when it came to these things. But personally, I found these to be, unfortunately, a little boring after the first few because you can't really approach these any differently than what you would usually expect. In fact, there are even some invisible walls to stop you from trying to approach these things differently. So maybe these will be buffed out in a future patch, but until then, it's basically rinse and repeat when it comes to these things. After a while, you even get the ability to finally take on bosses. And obviously, as we all know, bosses are a big part of any game. So there are 4 main bosses in this game. However, while the creature design for both bosses and world creatures, by the way, is amazing, the way you take down these creatures is boring after a while, unfortunately. We'll cover more of this in the gameplay section, but just to let everyone know ahead of time, it doesn't take much to really take down these magnificent looking creatures. I will say though, I love the amount of customization you get, from weapons to fighting combos, powers. Hey, you give me ice powers in any game and I'm gonna be happy. And even costumes to make your animal look exactly how you want it. The world is also amazing when it comes to just simply design and the look and everything. We'll get into more of that in the graphics and everything. The amount of variety in the world, from forests to landscapes to you name it. Heck, there's even mountains and everything. In fact, I think they took our inspiration from potentially Breath of the Wild when you go into the cold areas of the mountains and you do start to freeze slowly. So you gotta be a little careful there. Overall, Biomutant has a lot going for it in terms of scale. It's just, unfortunately, once you start to get into each of those elements, things start to break a bit.
Gameplay-wise, Biomutant is a beautiful open-world RPG that seems to skew more towards a casual audience. Before you step into the world, you choose a species and a class combination for your character that usually leans towards one of the 3 main forms of combat in the game: melee combat, range combat, or psi power combat. And once you start exploring and leveling, you'll receive skill points to purchase perks and increase your attributes that augment your playstyle. The game starts off fairly slow, but once you've escaped the tutorial, you're greeted with a massive world to loot and explore, and a myriad of side quests and gameplay systems to keep you entertained across multiple biomes and hazardous areas. At its forefront, Biomutant boasts a robust crafting system where you can mix and match parts to create any ranged or melee weapon you want, from flaming shotguns and radiation rifles to massive cryo maces. There's also a wide variety of goofy armor that you can wear to increase your stats or resistances so that you can traverse some of the game's hazardous zones. For example, you might need high cryo resistance gear in a cryo zone so that you don't freeze to death. There's also a faction system where you will align yourself with a tribe and go to war against opposing factions, capturing outposts, and unlocking special tribal weapons and new vendors. These factions also introduce the Paragon system of Biomutant, where you're able to choose between light and dark actions. These light and dark actions in the long term can affect the ending of the game, but in the short term determine how quickly you can unlock certain side powers, which brings me to my next point, which is combat. Putting it lightly, combat in Biomutant is very hit or miss due to extremely basic AI and some odd design choices. You're able to wield ranged, melee, and side powers and mutations all at the same time, but they don't necessarily flow together smoothly. In combat, you use different unlock combos to enter a state of super wung fu and perform cool special attacks, but melee and ranged weapons in combat has an element of weightlessness that detracts from this cool experience. Side powers and biogenetic mutations take a few levels to get going, but once they do, they range from being totally worthless to insanely powerful with little in between. Melee combat is swift and the combos are cool, but oftentimes clunky, lacking impact, and force you to remain stuck in certain animations, which can be really annoying. Ranged combat, on the other hand, is incredibly powerful and safe, but because of that, it can be somewhat boring as it makes all of the other combat seem a little bit worse in comparison. It's in these combat scenarios and even boss fights where some of Biomutant's glaring issues start to show, and unfortunately has a trickle-down effect that impacts all of the other core systems of the game. The enemy AI is incredibly basic, which leads to a very relaxing, casual RPG experience, which normally is not necessarily a bad thing, but the issue is that in this case, it makes everything you've built your character for kind of seem pointless.
Alright, as for the presentation, I was extremely impressed with the visuals of this game. While it's not going to blow your mind or win the 2020 Best Graphics Award or anything like that, it was still very impressive. Heck, on my PC, I run an i90-10900K and a 1080 for the win GPU, and it ran pretty well. Yes, I know it's not the greatest graphics card, but what can you do in 2021, right? Anyway, it has to be what you would expect, and honestly, for the PC port, I was actually very impressed with all of the extra load features that included as well. You'd be surprised when people always say like, well, there's not a lot of options for the PC port or anything like that, or it's always crashing, or it's not made as well, right? Because it's like, they mostly care about the console and everything, and they only just port it over barely to the PC. Now, this game did very well for that, and I was very surprised about that. In fact, actually, after doing some research for some other reviews and players on Reddit, it seems that both the PC version and the console version seem to be pretty stable, although we did hear a couple of things about the PlayStation apparently sometimes crashing. Correct us if we're wrong in the comments below, or if you've seen anything about this, but that's just simply what we've heard. So again, keep that in mind when looking at whatever version that you want to pick up yourself. Overall, very minimal crashes in terms of what we've seen from other people. And we have to talk about the world design again, because it's absolutely phenomenal. From icy mountains to barren wastelands to lush forests and everything in between, the world just looks amazing. And the creature design, again, needs to be talked about again because it is so good. I mean, you see a lot of these AAA games these days where, character and enemy varieties are they're not that many, or like they're kind of rinse and repeat, where it's like, it's technically different, but it's the same character model that you saw at the beginning of the game, just with like a cloak over them now, or a dark sword or something, right? Whereas in this game, there's a lot of uniqueness to the creatures, both big and small, so I definitely like that from this game. So overall, though, the presentation and graphics get an A+ from us.
As far as my own personal experience and opinions with Biomutant, I'm honestly a bit torn. The game is beautiful and there's lots to do and explore, but the AI and some of the design decisions just make it feel like what you're building your character for doesn't matter, and having that feeling in an RPG just does not sit well with me, and I consider it a pretty big flaw, and it hurts the rest of what otherwise would be a really fantastic game. I love progression and grinding for cool builds, but it just makes me lose that eagerness to go and explore every nook and cranny and every side quest and use all those other crafting systems and Paragon systems to create builds. Specifically, the enemy AI in this game is just so bad. Like, really, really bad. It seems to only have the function of walking towards you slowly, sometimes jumps at you, or sometimes shoots at you. The enemy variety is fairly decent, but how all the enemies act is basically the same. They just kind of waddle towards you. This reduces the combat system of the game. You don't have to go and do those crazy combos. You don't have to go and use any insane side powers. You can literally just walk in a circle or walk backwards and nothing can ever kill you. Just as an example, my very first playthrough, I basically went 4/5 of the way through the game using just like the tutorial automatic rifle that I found with no modifications to it. And I had zero problems at all. It was just a very easy experience. You can literally just walk around things and they won't touch you. The same can't really be said for melee combat that much. I mean, the AI is bad in a different way from melee combat because when you're actually getting hit by them, they don't seem to have that impact or registration when you hit them back to like stagger or anything like that. They seem to just be mindless zombies. So in melee combat, you're constantly being hit by like 6 sides with bullets or with melees, and even if you go and you hit them with a combo, you're still locked in an animation and getting hit by something else. And so this AI is just a recurring theme of making your builds and everything you worked for kind of seem pointless, and it seems to be just a recurring theme throughout Biomutant, and that's why I'm so torn on this game. And it even finds its way into some of the bigger boss fights of the game. I'm not going to spoil it, but your builds don't seem to matter that much when you actually get into these giant boss fights with these cool boss creatures that actually have some really unique abilities that I haven't seen in other RPGs. The way that Biomutant kind of pigeonholes you into doing it in a certain way ruined the experience slightly for me. Me personally, I don't like that type of stuff. When I go and I make a character in an RPG, I want to be able to use that character when it matters the most. I don't want to be pigeonholed into being on a mechanical chicken or something to fight a boss when I have a bunch of stuff that I've created on my own that's meant to be used to fight bosses. Obviously the chicken is a made up example, but I hope you understand my point. The AI feeling really bad makes it so the combat feels the same way, and it trickles down to the other subsystems of the game. When the combat feels bad, then maybe you don't feel like you need to craft that much, and when you don't need to craft that much, you don't need to craft and get materials, so you don't have to explore as much, and it kind of just makes this snowball effect, and this ends up hurting an otherwise great game.
Like Adam said before me, guys, I pretty much agree with every single thing that he said in terms of our personal opinions on this game and everything like that. It's just, it feels like it's in a beta almost sometimes. And, maybe they will hash this out. And, again, we don't want to just berate the team because, they were a small team and everything like that. But sometimes you do have to, say the things that are not working very well. So overall, while we both, I think, enjoyed some aspects of the game, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be improved upon, potentially for any kind of sequel, or if they patch it up in the future, we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there. So I think, just like Adam said though, but for me, I'm going to personally say that this is definitely one of those like really deep sales type of waits where, maybe you find it on Steam or you find it on sale in a store somewhere for like $20 or something like that. I do not think this is worth full price. I really don't. So go ahead and do with that what you will with that particular information. But with that being said, though, that is going to be our review. Overall, if we had to give it a score, I guess we'd give it around a 6.5 to a 7 probably. But yeah, so let us know your thoughts down below in the comments, how you feel about this game. Do you think we were too harsh on it? Do you agree with our rating, or do you think we were too soft on it? And do you think it deserves an even lower score? So make sure you go ahead and do that. And don't forget, as always, hit that like button. Subscribe if you have to be new for more reviews and everything like that. We try to cover as many games as we can and review them when we can. So if you want to see more of these and you like this style and everything, let us know your thoughts down in the comments as always. And again, subscribe, hit the notification button, hit all that stuff so you will be notified the moment we do. So anyway, guys, that is going to be it though for our review of Biomutant. Let us know your thoughts again below in the comments as always. Until next time, everyone, we will see you all in the next one. Johnny.